I'm a 27-year-old woman and this happened 6 months ago. Until then, I'd always rolled my eyes at paranormal stories, right up until I lived one. I babysit 3 kids, Tracy 10, Mike 8, and Sally 4, they're good kids. Aside from the occasional normal meltdown, I've never had much trouble with them. One day their mom called and asked if I could stay with them for 6 days while she and her husband went on a business trip. I needed the money, and I love those kids like they're mine, so I agreed. The first 3 nights were completely ordinary, the fourth night wasn't. That evening we watched cartoons until bedtime. All 3 were sleeping in the same room because Mike's room was being remodeled. Sally was the hardest to settle, she had the most energy and fought sleep the longest. When she finally drifted off, I went downstairs, sank onto the couch, and turned on the TV. Then I heard Sally's ABC toy, the kind with letter buttons that plays little songs. My first thought was that she'd climbed out of bed to play. Irritated, I got up and headed upstairs, but when I opened their bedroom door, Tracy, Mike, and Sally were all out cold. I looked down, no toys scattered on the floor. I checked the closet where their toys were kept, hunting for the one I'd heard, but it wasn't there. That made no sense, I had heard it clearly. And then I heard it again, only this time it was downstairs. Now I know my ABCs, next time won't you sing with me? My stomach dropped so hard I went cold. I stood there frozen because I knew Sally hadn't done this. Something else was in the house. I rushed downstairs and found the ABC toy sitting on the dining room table. It hadn't been there before. ABCs, come sing with me. I almost screamed. I grabbed it and yanked out the batteries. Darlene, what's wrong? Tracy called from the top of the stairs. Nothing, sweetie, I said, forcing my voice steady. Go back to bed. I didn't know what to think. I put the batteries in a drawer and went back upstairs to check on them. When I stepped into the room, Tracy sat up. I sat beside her and told her everything was fine. You're lying, she said quietly. I can tell when you're scared. I stared at her, confused, and then tried to play it off. I just had a bad dream, that's all. She shook her head slowly. Sebastian scared you? Who's Sebastian? I asked. Tracy turned toward the wall like she was done talking. Don't let him scare you, Darlene. He just wants to play with Sally's toy. What the hell? I was unsettled enough already, and I didn't want to dig any deeper, so I left the room. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day was normal, and that following night I actually managed to fall asleep until around 4:00 a.m. when whispering woke me. It was dark. I rubbed my eyes and listened. The voices weren't in my room. They were coming from the kids' bedroom across the hall. I walked over, pressed my ear to their door, and heard it clearly, quiet voices on the other side. Assuming the kids were awake, I opened the door. Only Tracy was up, sitting on the rug. She looked up at me like she'd been caught. Tracy, I whispered, what are you doing? Nothing. You need to get back to bed. And who were you talking to? Tracy just stared at me blank. Tracy, I heard you talking. You need to tell me who it was. After a beat, she said, matter of fact, Sebastian's mad you don't pay attention to him like you pay attention to us. He keeps trying to get you to notice him so you'll play with him. Every hair on me lifted. Tracy, that's not funny, I said, sharper than I meant to. Get back in bed. We'll talk later. She didn't move. Sebastian wants your attention now. By then, Mike and Sally were stirring awake. Tracy, I said, trying not to let my voice shake, Sebastian has to leave you alone. Mike groaned, half asleep. I looked between them. So, all of you know about Sebastian? They nodded like I'd asked whether the sky was blue. Thank God their parents were coming home that day. I just wanted out of that house. About an hour before they were due back, I made sandwiches. Mike and Sally ate with no problem and ran outside to play. Tracy didn't touch hers. Tracy, I said after a long stretch of watching her stare at the plate, you've been sitting here forever. Eat. I'll admit it, I was getting irritated. She was the oldest. I didn't expect this from her. She looked at me and asked, where's Sebastian's sandwich? I tried to laugh like it was pretend. Oh yeah. Where is Sebastian right now? Tracy answered without blinking. He's holding onto your leg. My entire body locked up. Just picturing that made me nauseous. I forced myself to stay calm. I even aimed my voice down toward the floor like I was humoring a child. Well, Sebastian, if you don't sit down, I'm not making you a sandwich. Tracy smiled and glanced down at my feet. I wanted her parents home immediately. I made an extra sandwich and set it on the table beside Tracy in the empty space next to her. "Aren't we ridiculous sometimes?" I muttered, more to myself than anyone. Tracy tilted her head, listening to something I couldn't hear, then said, "He says thank you. I can't explain it, but that actually eased something in me." Not long after, her parents came home. Once they'd greeted everyone and the kids were outside with their dad, their mom noticed the untouched extra sandwich. "Why is there another sandwich?" she asked. I lowered my voice. "The kids keep talking about a boy named Sebastian who lives here and wants my attention. Tracy wouldn't eat unless I made him one." Her face tightened instantly. "You said Sebastian. Yeah, you've heard that name before?" she asked, already knowing the answer. We sat on the couch and I told her everything. Sally's toy going off, finding it downstairs, Tracy's comments, the whispering at 4:00 a.m., the sandwich. When I finished, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. She admitted it happened to them every other night, and they'd basically learned to live with it. A warning would have been nice. Then she told me why. The family who lived there before them had a 4-year-old son who died in the house, and they moved out soon afterward. When Tracy was a newborn and they first moved in, nothing seemed off. But when Tracy became a toddler, her mom noticed she'd talk to herself. As Tracy got older and could explain more, she started saying a boy named Sebastian was sad and always wanted to play, especially at night. At first, her mom assumed it was an imaginary friend. But the longer it went on, the harder it was to explain away. Tracy would argue with nobody, full-on fights with empty air. Toys would disappear and later turn up in the locked shed out back. There was no way Tracy could have put them there. It scared the parents, but they couldn't just move, so they dealt with it. Sebastian might have been annoying, she said, but he didn't hurt anyone. Later, Mike and Sally picked up on Tracy being awake at night, and Mike started telling her to stop and go to sleep like it was a normal routine. Then she looked at me and said something that made my stomach turn all over again. "Tracy told me Sebastian likes you since you started babysitting." I told her not to say anything because I didn't want to scare you off. It would destroy us if you left, but I'd understand. I didn't know what to say. None of this was what I signed up for. But Sebastian hadn't harmed anyone. If anything, I felt sorry for him, and I couldn't walk out on those kids after bonding with them the way I had, so I kept babysitting. After that, nothing major happened, just small things going missing and turning up in odd places. Over time, I adjusted more than I ever thought I could. Before all this, I didn't believe in the paranormal. Now I think you can't truly dismiss it until something happens right in front of you. For reference, I'm a 29-year-old man, but I first remember hearing the voices when I was 15. I don't mean voices inside my head. I'm not schizophrenic. I mean voices coming from under the ground. I grew up in rural Missouri. Out back, past the yard and into the trees, right before our property line ended, there was a stone well. When I was little, my parents were always chasing after me because I'd make a beeline straight for it. Apparently, I used to insist people were talking down there. I don't remember that part, but I believed them. When I was 15, I was mowing the lawn and heard what sounded like distant screaming echoing from the woods. I shut off the mower and followed the noise through the trees until I saw the well, half hidden under shadowy branches like it had been swallowed by the forest. I hadn't thought about it in years. I leaned over the stone rim and stared into pitch-black nothing. The screams were coming from deep inside. They were horrific, tormented, raw, like dozens of people wailing at once. The only way I can describe it is that it sounded like their skin was being peeled and their feet were held in fire. I stayed there, stupidly trying to rationalize it, convinced there had to be a radio or some kind of speaker down there. Then one of the voices said my name. My heart stopped. I stumbled back and ran straight out of the woods and all the way to the house. My older brother was in the garage. I grabbed his arm, panicking, yelling that there were people screaming in the well. He swore at me and snapped that I needed to stop acting like such a. But he still followed me outside so I could prove it. When we reached the well, the screaming felt even worse, louder, more frantic. I stayed back, skin crawling. My brother walked right up, leaned over, and even spit down into it. "Well," he said, turning to me, "where's the screaming?" I just stared at him, stunned. The sound was practically shaking me. It was undeniable. I was convinced he was messing with me, pretending not to hear it to make me feel crazy, until a woman screamed from below, so loud and sharp I actually flinched and dropped backward, landing on my knees. My brother didn't react at all. He looked at me like I'd lost it. I ran back to the house and refused to go near the well for months, but the screaming wouldn't leave my head. I barely slept. My brother and I weren't close. He picked on me sometimes, but he was too lazy to flush a toilet half the time, so the idea that he'd gone to the trouble of planting some elaborate prank didn't sit right. And even if there had been some recording down there, how could he have timed it so I'd hear my name? How could he stand there so calm, like he heard nothing? I started wondering if I was losing my mind. A few months later, I tried again, this time with my cousin and her Australian shepherd, Molly. I didn't tell them anything about the well. I figured if they reacted, I'd know it wasn't just me. We were maybe 20 steps into the trees when I heard the wailing start up again. Molly didn't so much as growl. My cousin walked right to the rim and even did a quick little dance step on the stone edge before wandering off like it was nothing. Meanwhile, the voices below were screaming for mercy. I made up an excuse about needing to go back and practically ran to the house. I'm not ashamed to say it. I locked myself in my bedroom closet and cried for over an hour. About a week later, I went back alone with an old cassette recorder. I set it running on the stone rim and ducked behind a tree, hands clamped over my ears, shaking while at least 3 different voices called my name and begged for the torture to stop. After about 15 minutes, I took the recorder inside, rewound the tape, and played it in my bedroom. All I heard was the forest, wind, leaves, distant nothing. That was it. I decided I was done. I swore I'd never go back to the well, and I kept that promise for 7 years, until I was 22. By then I'd moved out, but my mom was on vacation and I'd come by to feed her cat and water her plants. Morbid curiosity got the better of me, so I walked into the backyard and returned to the trees. The voices were still there, still wailing. I stood at the well for maybe a minute. I heard one voice clearly say my name, and then I hung for days. No one came. I turned to leave, and as I walked away, another voice called one last thing up after me. "She killed your sister." That night, when my mom got home, I was waiting in the kitchen. I asked her about my great-uncle, her father's brother, who died when I was 4. I asked how. She looked caught off guard, then said he'd hanged himself in his tool shed with an extension cord. I asked quietly how long it took for someone to find him. Her expression shifted. She said he'd been dead at least 4 days before anyone discovered him. Then I asked the next question without blinking. "Mom, did I ever have a sister?" My mother stared at me, shocked, furious, and demanded to know why I'd asked that. I kept pressing until she admitted that between me and my older brother, she'd terminated a pregnancy when my brother was a year old because she wasn't ready for another child. After that, I went to the well one final time. It was about a year later when my mom was selling the house. I covered the well with a sheet of plywood and sealed it down. While I worked, the voices roared up at me that I'd be joining them soon and that my daughter would be raped at 18. At the time, I wasn't even dating anyone. Today, as I write this, I'm married. I have a 3-month-old daughter. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Call me a liar, call me crazy, that's fine. All I know is the only place I ever heard those screams, ever, was right there, over that well in that exact patch of Missouri woods. And if I took you there, you probably wouldn't hear a thing anyway. I don't believe in heaven or hell, or at least I didn't. I still can't explain what I heard in that stone pit, but if hell exists, maybe it isn't as far away as we like to think. This next story happened during my senior year of high school. I'm 22 now and I still see it clearly. I absolutely believe in the paranormal. I've had other experiences too, maybe I'll share them another time. High school itself was normal enough. What made it bearable was my friends. 2 of them matter here, I'll call them Jacob and Daniel. By chance, the 3 of us ended up sharing multiple classes, and Jacob and I even had similar career goals. Senior year, after our first 3 regular classes, Jacob and I went to a prep program where we studied early medical stuff. Jacob, Daniel, and I were the stoners of the group. We smoked most days during the hour-and-a-half break between schools, sometimes after class, sometimes on weekends. I'm not trying to glamorize weed, it's legal recreationally in my state now, but back then it was. I've always compared it to alcohol, pros, cons, responsibility. We still kept our grades up. We had a couple usual spots to hang out. One Friday night we decided to switch it up. I suggested somewhere dark and tucked away, somewhere we wouldn't be noticed. The plan was simple: chill for a bit, then go home and play Xbox like we always did. I suggested my old elementary school, right in the middle of my neighborhood. Looking back, it was a dumb idea. It was only 8:00 p.m. and my area was packed with young families, so there were always people around. On top of that, police cruised through at night to keep things safe. Still, we went. Daniel and Jacob picked me up, and we drove over. We aimed for the playground on the far end of a huge field beside the main school building. As soon as we stepped onto the grounds, I caught a faint sound, kids laughing. I didn't see anyone near the playground, so I dismissed it. In my neighborhood, kids were always outside somewhere. Jacob lagged behind us, texting his girlfriend. Daniel and I kept walking, talking about our day. When we were about halfway across the field, I noticed something white sitting on a bench near the playground. At first I thought it was a coyote. Those were common, but coyotes usually keep their distance from people. Daniel saw it too. We kept moving. Then at maybe 100 feet out, I realized the shape wasn't right. It looked pale and thin and wrong, with a kind of transparency, like cheap Halloween fabric, except it was upright. It turned its head and looked straight at us. Daniel and I stopped dead, and then it rose off the bench and floated toward us. Oh, no, we ran. No hesitation, no debate, just full sprint back the way we came. Jacob was about 20 feet behind and saw us bolt. He chased after us, yelling, asking what we were doing. We didn't answer. We didn't stop, we didn't look back until we piled into Daniel's car and tore down the street. I know what people will say. You were high, you imagined it. We were. We'd taken a full week off smoking because we had major exams coming up. After we got our breath back, the adrenaline turned into nervous laughter. It was thrilling in a sick way, like we'd gotten away with something. Then Jacob, genius that he was, suggested we go back, and against our better judgment, we agreed. We approached from a different direction, walking along the side of the school building. When we reached the corner that looked out over the dark field, Jacob stopped and motioned for us to freeze. "SHH," he whispered, "I think I hear something." We stood there listening. We didn't see anything at first, then we heard footsteps running through the grass straight toward us. We ran again. After that, we found somewhere else to hang out. As Daniel drove away, I looked back and saw the white figure hovering near the sidewalk that led up to the school. Daniel died in a car accident a few months later. Jacob and I are still close. When we talk about Daniel, when we laugh about old memories, it always circles back to that night and the thing in the field. I've never been comfortable putting this story out there. Only a few close friends and my wife know it. My wife is the one who convinced me to send it in, hoping it might get shared on a YouTube channel. I'm leaving real names out to avoid any fallout. In this version, I'm Jack and my friends are Matt, Tim, and Russell. A couple years ago, those three talked me into going to a haunted house attraction with them. Haunted houses aren't my thing. I don't like horror movies, creepy media, ghost stories, none of it. But they convinced me to come along just to sit in the car while they went inside. There'd been break-ins in that area and they didn't want to risk it. The haunted house had been advertised in a small local paper. They assumed it would be decent and at least somewhat busy. It was only open Halloween night and the night before, so they chose October 30th to avoid the crowds. GPS took us to the warehouse district on the south side of town. Warehouse district is generous. It's mostly big open fields of cotton and corn with storehouses beside them. We pulled up to the address and saw a chain-link fence with a big no trespassing sign. Above it, someone had hung a piece of cardboard that said haunted house ahead in what looked like Sharpie. The gate was open, leading into a dirt lot beside a storehouse. No other cars. No decorations, just emptiness. Tim looked at Russell. "You sure this is the place?" Russell pointed at the cardboard. "The sign's right there, dummy. The address is in the ad." I put it in my phone. Apple Maps never does me wrong. From the backseat, Matt said, "Let's just go in and ask. If it's wrong, we leave." Tim sighed. "Fine. But if my car gets towed, you're paying." He pulled into the lot. Russell and Matt got out immediately, stretching. The two of them were 6-foot gym guys, and Tim's little Honda CR-V wasn't built for that. Tim and I were smaller, so it hadn't been as bad for us. Even before we moved, I felt uneasy. An attraction with a cardboard sign and a deserted lot didn't scream legitimate, it screamed trap. Russell nodded toward the storehouse. "There's a door down at the end, probably where we buy tickets." He and Matt headed that way. Tim flashed me a grin. "Come on, Jack, at least walk in with us and make sure it's not abandoned. If it's real, you can come back out and watch the car." I looked at the empty lot. "Yeah, sure, it's not like anyone's around to break into it anyway." We joined them at the door. "Unlocked?" Tim asked. "We didn't try it," Russell said. "We waited on you guys." "Well," I said, "let's get it over with." Russell turned the knob and pulled. The door swung open without resistance. Inside was a completely bare storehouse, wide, empty floor, no booths, no props, nothing. Matt scanned the space. "Did they cancel it, or is this your idea of a joke?" Russell checked his watch. "The ad said it started at sunset. That was over an hour ago." I looked at mine, 8:12 p.m. Matt pointed to the nearest wall. "Look at that graffiti. Whoever did it has zero creativity." The paint was a dull, muddy brown, slapped on in clashing, messy shapes, not professional. Not even like gang tagging, just chaotic. As we stared at the walls, we kept drifting farther inside, almost without realizing it, until we were near the center of the building, in a huge open room that seemed to take up most of the structure. "Hey," Tim said, pointing to the far corner opposite the door. "What's that?" It looked like a stand, like the kind musicians use to hold sheet music. We walked over, still glancing at the walls as we went. More crude markings were everywhere. Some shapes almost looked like symbols, but most were so badly drawn I couldn't tell what was intentional and what was just smeared paint. I thought I saw an ankh on one wall, something like a pentagram on another, and a shape that reminded me of an upside-down cross. But when I mentioned it, none of them agreed. Matt said the pentagram looked like a table. He said the ankh was basically a T. Russell claimed it was all just random. Tim didn't seem to notice anything at all. Tim reached the stand first. On it was a book that looked leather-bound. He picked it up, opened it, and flipped through. "Huh," he said, "I can't read any of this. It's like some weird language." He handed it to me. The cover felt like leather, but too flexible, almost spongy. I opened it and saw what he meant. The writing looked foreign, full of letters that seemed flipped or twisted like some kind of distorted Cyrillic. I couldn't make sense of a single line. I passed it to Russell. He opened it, stared for a moment, then looked up at us like we were messing with him. "What do you mean it's not in English? I can read it fine." "What?" I blurted. "Yeah," he said, glancing back down. "It says, I don't know what happened after that. The next thing I remember is waking up in my apartment, in my bed, wearing my pajamas." My phone was on the charger. My roommate was asleep in his room like it was any other night. I checked the time, 4:30 a.m., 8 hours were just gone. I jumped up, stepped outside, and saw Tim's car parked in front of his apartment, same complex as mine. I called Tim, called Matt, called Russell. No one answered. Around 9:00 a.m., Tim finally picked up. His voice sounded shaken. He said he was just as freaked out as I was. Later that day, we reached Russell and Matt. We agreed to meet the day after Halloween and try to piece together what we could, anything we could, about what happened after Russell started reading. The day after Halloween, we got together. Not one of us could remember a single thing beyond that moment, so we decided to go back. We drove out to the address, we double-checked Russell's GPS, we checked the newspaper ad again. It was the right location, but the storehouse wasn't there. The dirt parking lot wasn't there either. It was just not there, like it had never existed. After that, we made an agreement we wouldn't talk about it again. Not with each other, not with anyone, and we haven't, not once. 8 years ago, when I was around 10, my family moved into a small, single-story place with plans to renovate it and flip it. It sat in a heavily industrial area, and it hadn't even been designed as a home. It was more like an office building. My parents converted the biggest office into their bedroom because it had an attached bathroom. My siblings shared a room on the outer edge of the house. I got stuck with a smaller room closer to the center, no windows. The first time I stepped into that room, I felt something I couldn't explain, like I wasn't supposed to be in there. Like I'd crossed some silent boundary, the feeling clung to me. I tried to ignore it by unpacking, setting up my bed, arranging toys, doing anything to make it mine. But the longer I worked, the stronger the sensation got, like I was defacing someone else's space. My door was open while I finished, and I happened to be alone in the house. That's when I heard it, frantic claws skittering across the kitchen floor, then racing up the hall. If you've had dogs, you know that sound. I grinned and ran out, thinking our dogs had arrived early. The plan had been to keep them at a friend's house until we built a fence, but maybe plans had changed. In the hall, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure tucked in a corner, then it slipped toward the front entrance and vanished. I called out, expecting my dog to come barreling around the corner. The running stopped, silence took over. I searched everywhere. No dog, no sound of a door opening or closing. I went outside and asked my parents where the dogs were, and they reminded me they weren't coming for a few more days. My 10-year-old brain couldn't fit what I'd seen into reality. I didn't even try to explain it. I just kept quiet and slept in my siblings' room that night, half convinced there was an animal loose in the house. About 3 months later, the renovations were going well, and I'd started to feel okay in my bedroom. The "you don't belong here" feeling had faded, and I was even enjoying having a private little cave. Then one night I woke up to whispering. I sat up, heart thumping, because it sounded like someone across the room was saying my name. I snapped on the light. Nothing, no one. I turned the light off, lay back down, and told myself it had been sleep brain, until my younger sister started screaming from her room. My parents and I rushed down the hall. She was shaking, terrified. She said someone had been calling her name from near the window, taunting her, trying to lure her outside toward the small pond in the backyard. She swore she'd seen something staring in through the glass. My dad turned on the porch light and went outside to reassure her. A few minutes later, he came back and said he hadn't seen anything. Years later, long after we'd moved out, my father admitted he actually had seen something near the pond. Some kind of animal. He'd assumed a bobcat, but he'd felt threatened by it and went back inside. That same night, my sister told me she didn't sleep at all because she kept seeing something with red eyes moving around the backyard, drifting into view through her window every few minutes. On their own, those first incidents could be blamed on nightmares, imagination, paranoia, but things didn't stop. Even my parents started getting uneasy, though they tried not to show it. One afternoon, my sister and I were watching TV when we heard heavy thuds traveling across the roof. Not light scuffling, deep, weighty footfalls. The beams in the ceiling sounded like they were straining. We panicked. We were convinced something huge, a bear, something, was on top of the house trying to get in. We dove behind the couch, which is ridiculous in hindsight. If anything was about to come through the roof, the basement would have been smarter. When my parents got home, we didn't have to explain. The footsteps were still going. My dad grabbed a rusty pitchfork from the garage and went outside, ready to jab whatever it was off the roof. He figured it was a dog. Our dogs weren't home that day, though I can't remember why. The only way up was a dead tree leaning along the far wall. My dad climbed it easily. When he reached the roof, there was nothing up there. Nothing except a toy horse I'd lost the first week we moved in, and my sister's doll she'd brought home earlier that day. And even when my dad stomped across the roof as hard as he couldn't recreate the sound we'd heard. That weekend, my parents had the tree cut down. After that, there were smaller things, the TV acting strange, turning off by itself at night. Nothing that felt urgent until summer. The renovations were finished. We were preparing to move out because a buyer had already been lined up. One day I was playing hide-and-seek with my sisters and chose a chest in the back room as my hiding spot. It was stuffed with coats, boots, and random junk. I climbed in carefully and tucked myself into the mess. My leg bumped against someone else. I assumed my younger sister had chosen the same spot. I didn't want to give us away, so I didn't say anything. I just slowly pulled the lid closed. There was enough room for two. I don't know how long we stayed in there. I heard my older sister come into the room and search a couple times. After several minutes, I cracked the lid to get air and peeked out through the coats. Through the doorway, I saw my sisters searching the family room. Both of them. I screamed and shot up so fast I slammed my head into the lid as I tried to scramble out. And that's when something grabbed my leg. Not a hard, crushing grip, more like a deliberate touch, like a message. I was here the whole time. The chest tipped forward. I burst out, shrieking and crying so hard I couldn't breathe. When my sisters found me, they panicked. They kept asking why I was covered in marks. In the bathroom mirror, I saw scratches and bruises up and down my arms, legs, and even my neck. I wasn't bleeding, but I looked like someone had poked me over and over with thumbtacks. My parents assumed my sisters had done it, even after I told them I'd been alone in the chest. We moved away that summer. Looking back, the strangest part is how fast something like that can fade into the background once your life changes. New place, new routines, life keeps moving. My family remembers what happened, but we almost never talk about it. Not because we're terrified, more because what's the point? We can't fix it and we can't explain it. Sometimes I wonder if that's how most people cope with the unexplainable, by filing it away, acting indifferent, treating it like it might as well have never happened. There's always a reason to be afraid.